Asina. It's a little bit of a church revival. But I see you with the FOMO, people. You know, you get all like, damn, man. Asina imani, imani. No, that's fine. Are all things sorted now? Okay. That's Phew. Okay, ngosini comrades, nam the Nepali crisis up. Okay, so I'm going to sit from here so that we can all see each other. Thank you very much, Stephen and Marjanet, for joining us. You know who's in the room. No? We've taken time to convene grassroots movements and organizations from different parts of the country. And we've been asking ourselves some serious questions around this moment. One aspect of it is thinking about the ongoing need for grassroots formations to spend time together and to figure out how to build solidarity across our formations and across our issues and across our communities. The second thing is to think quite critically about how do we work towards 2024, the ballot and beyond. There was just a question posed a few minutes ago that said, inside of this thinking about the vote and beyond, we must also be thinking about ways to protect our communities and to insist on ethical campaigning. No? There are also big questions in the room around strategy and tactics. We absolutely want to leave day 2 with some sense of what it means to think strategically about voting. Someone else in the room had said to us, we must not forget to talk numbers, because the vote itself, and we really want to change and shift anything, numbers speak. And so that's where we must think about how those issues that we work on in our respective organizations, in our communities, are the things that drive what the vote becomes eventually. Am I representing our issues as is? We've also said we're tired of being convened by philanthropy, so just be aware that we are also people of trying to think deeply also about how do we unset our sector. So there's a robust conversation in the room. We haven't created a homogenous community here, and maybe there's no intention to do that too, but we've got questions. And so what we are wanting to put to you again is, what are you seeing, and what would you carefully advise us to be thinking about for this moment? So welcome, that was me setting the scene there. Ahmad Kaban have also welcomed you with song. I think we'll start with you, Stephen.
Okay. Right.
There you go.
You hear me?
Yeah, and we can see you. Rise and shine.
So you want me to start? Sorry, I'm just not clear. You want me to try to just give my overview of what I think is going on?
100%.
Okay, sure. Look, let me start off by saying that, for very obvious reasons, it's necessary to just start by saying a few things about why we should care about elections at all. I don't have to make that argument tonight, but it counts because it would exist with people in the organisation didn't care about elections, but there's an understandable view from people, from some people, that given the situation of many people in this country, given the fact that 30 years of democracy, many people still live in poverty and many people still lack access to the basics of life, democracy is a waste of time, and the parties are a waste of time. I don't think that's true, but I think that it could be true if you take what I would call the textbook view. And the textbook view is that what all this is about is that we choose a political party, and that political party then does what we want, and we achieve our goals in that way. Now, if you take that textbook view, you are going to be very sorely disappointed. Many people have. I think there was a fairly wide expectation in 1994 that the current governing party was elected. It would be able to make good on its promises for better life or ensure that the problems which have been created by apartheid were all solved almost 7 years later. That is an indication of the problem relying too much on the hope that a particular party will solve the problem. And I think, incidentally, that a lot of work in this country devoted to the concerns of the majority, to changing imbalances that cause many people to live in poverty, to endure inequality, being less effective than they may be, precisely because in all sorts of complicated ways, people have devoted a lot of energy to trying to get one political party, one political organisation to make good on all the aspirations which South Africans have. But there's another way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is, first of all, to look at an international research project of which I was privileged to be part of a few years ago. Essentially, what we were trying to understand was the way in which citizens' movements, such as the ones gathered in this room today, how citizens' movements could actually change policy, could change the law and policies, obviously, to the advantage of people living in poverty. And what we found across three continents was that in every single case, the fact that there were elections and the fact that political parties were trying to get votes from people actually mattered. It mattered, and it made the campaign easy. Incidentally, the South African campaign, the South African study was on the treatment action campaign, which is, as many people will remember, for treatment for people living with HIV and AIDS. And here at that stage, in our political system, the treatment action campaign found it easier in provinces where political parties were hardly competing for votes than it was in those provinces where they weren't, because it was possible for political parties to come to the conclusion that helping people living with HIV and AIDS would actually win the votes. There's also work that's done by a man called Partha Chatterjee, who's an Indian academic and social thinker. Chatterjee, which will be familiar to many people, does a lot of his work in the slums of India, which are roughly the same as our shack settlements and large parts of our townships. And according to strategy, people in slums are living in what is called a contradiction. And the contradiction is that, according to the Indian constitution, they are citizens who have rights and equality. In other words, according to the Indian constitution, slum dwellers are people who have a right to be heard and a right to participate in decisions. In the minds of the people who run the city, strategy says, these citizens are just planning problems. They're planning problems because their houses are in the wrong place. They don't behave the way in which nice middle class city dwellers are supposed to behave. But for our purposes, the important point here is that strategy says, well, how do planning problems become citizens? Show way in which they become citizens, obviously by organizing. But once again, that the fact that there are political parties competing for the votes of shop dwellers, slum dwellers in their case, means that they have power which they otherwise wouldn't have. And what the activist organizations in Indian slums do is they, in effect, they play parties all against each other. Which means that they don't join any party, they don't form alliances. They're quite strategic putting it out there. The party that supports them on a particular issue, they will probably get votes as a result. The activists actually promised to deliver them, but they said actually delivered their ability to play with parties against each other. Obviously, they're very much aware that if you make the issues known to the politicians, there's going to be people that you're organizing, you're more likely to get a hearing in the future.
Yeah.
So that's going to be where you are now.
So before you come in with just that bit, I just want to try and keep the room together. And yes, we are hearing the provocations, comrades, and they're starting to answer the questions. Like case itibana potential for abantu who don't want to vote is maybe not always true, because abantu bayafuna to see some kind of change, at least in their material and immediate lives. See a man song in it? But the idea, maybe all of these things are still for us to debate and discuss. Maybe the other thing in that is that the idea from 94 is that we've got a single party that can in fact give us this change. It may not be the complete truth. See a man song in it? So are there multiple places and areas where now as the voter you are finding a party that looks like you and feels like you and your things, and maybe that's where you go exercise your vote. See a song? One option. The second itibana uyabaleso prof nge-study they involved in wathatha case study yalapha eSouth Africa yena wasebenza nge-tech ne uthi ke ngoku it's clear and siyayazi nathi into yobana the reason sometimes some of the tools, strategy and tactics esisebenzisayo thina to impact change ekuhlaleni is to fight for policy changes that will represent the people. Are we together? Uthi ke ngoku the funny thing is that there is lots of activity of political mobilization. The electoral machine is in full speed at ekuhlaleni. Is where now we're as part of civil society, a movement, an opportunity to show about what must it look like when the party is trying to convince you. Does it make sense? No. And when there's less mobilization and active party maneuvering area you've got less potential, but busy, now you can become busy, and in fact it helps you and your case in showing abantu into yobana zikhona alternatives. Can you look for a party that says this and this if these are your issues? Are we together? So it speaks back to that challenge we city bana. We can't as movements watch the elections happen. In fact, there's opportunity for us when they are happening not to reaffirm a case ne campaign zethu ne issues zethu ekuhlaleni. Siyamani sonke ningavumu ulala comrades ne yiyo le besiyizele. Uthi ke ngoku nalamfo big question nalamfo wase India athetha ngayo apha uthi uzo social thinker interested kule micimbi yethu is saying aba bantu abahlali, I'm sure, know this term of being planning problems. Abantu abahlala kwi-settlements ezinganamanzi ne-flushing toilets namhlanje know this thing of being called planning problems. Uyabuza ke uba how do you go from being a planning problem to a citizen? Uyayiva ke uthi phayana bana there's opportunity mina phayana for immobilization yabantu. And that's the thing you use and you do to offset ipolitiki baseless. Siyamani sonke, the empty promises, so forth. So uthi khona opportunity to have those parties also play each other against each other, because makhangela ne vote yenu going back to la mandate city numbers, comrades. Ne? Last input bifikile apha yathi bana let's also talk about who's not here and the consideration of the urban and rural divide as we're sitting here together. And how do we support the most marginalized inside even of our own communities? Please, Dr. Comrades, even as it's happening, we bet it and we'll stop it and we'll just clarify things. Ne? But this is it. Okay, keep going, Prof.
Okay, that's obviously you're recognizing what she saw.
Sure.
Right, let's look at this from the South African point. I think the first big point we have to understand, obviously for many years in this country, what I've been talking about in India and other places didn't really exist. Because we did have, particularly in the areas in which most people live, which one election after election after elections, and that meant that it wasn't that easy to take advantage of the fact that politicians are competing for people's votes. That is now changing. In fact, already changed. I think that throughout this country, people haven't quite adjusted to the fact that we are now in a new political era. And the new political era, and I'm simply talking about party politics, the new political era is one in which the party which has been election after election after election is losing support. Is not winning elections as often as it did. It varies from party to party, and parts. In the Eastern Cape, not much or not much, but in many other parts of the country, so that if we go back to 2021, this process really started in 2014. But if we go back to the 2021 elections in November of that year for local government, the National Congress, for the first time in history, dropped to below 50%. And I must point out, because I heard reference to rural and urban divide, this is most obvious in the cities, where we see, particularly in Gauteng, for example, where we see several of the major municipalities now no longer governed by one party, governed by coalitions and so on. But the drop in the governing party is also quite remarkable in some rural parts. So that if you go back even to the 2019 national election, there was a lot of interest in the fact that the governing party almost lost Gauteng. But why? We found that in Free State and Mpumalanga and Northwest, the governing party also lost votes in many cases more than they in the major cities. So this is not just the media tends to focus on what happens in the cities, but this is not just something which happens. Something which is happening across the country, except, as I say, in a few particular areas. What it means is that we are now for the first national election since we became a democracy in which we don't know what the result will be, and it is at least possible, not inevitable, it's possible that the result will be that again, as in the national election, the local election, so in 2021 that he votes that he will drop below 50%, and that means this has created opportunities, this has already created opportunities, which I don't think have actually been used. So let me give you an example of one very small example. Is that to serve on the board of an NGO which tries to organize grassroots people in the cities to plan their lives. We had a meeting in 2016, just after the local elections of that. And we were talking about Johannesburg, and in Johannesburg, the ANC had lost the majority. The city was being governed by a coalition led by the Democratic Alliance. And people in the room were very concerned. A particular project would be taken away because of the change in government. And they said, would this project continue? And my answer then was, that's probably up to you. And the reason it's probably up to you is that no one party had a majority in Johannesburg. So that means that if you go to the governing party of the city, the mayor, and the mayor is not interested in your project, that is not the end of the story. The mayor doesn't have a majority. If you could convince the rest of the council, or a majority of the council, whatever the mayor, then you get your funding. And then I thought that the more people engage in activism, to put pressure on the council to keep this project, the more likely it was this project. And I find it interesting that nobody did anything about it. Nobody did put that pressure on. And the project didn't survive. I'm not saying it's a kind of miracle that all we have to do is spend activism and the project will survive, but nobody even tried. And therefore, we've landed up in a ridiculous situation over the last few years in some of our cities, where you've got one party running the mayor's office with sometimes 16% of people who are allowed to vote for this party, and the mayor's there, and everybody treats the mayor as though she or he had a majority of 70% or something. So I think we need to change our thinking about what we need to accept that if no party has a majority, if it's a coalition, sometimes we've even had situations where there's been minority, which is okay. The majority of the council doesn't vote for now. But you have opportunities for campaigning, for strategy, for putting pressure on the parties, which haven't existed up to now. Now, as I said, this is all been playing itself. It is next year perhaps going to play itself out. Now, if you look at, if you read newspapers, or you listen to the radio, or you watch television, you get the impression now that the next election is already sorted out, the ANC is going to go. That is not necessarily true. I mean, you really don't. But what we do know is it's a real possibility. And that has obviously changed the attitude of the ANC. Obviously, not whether that things are made good on their new attitude, but certainly their behavior is that they're not in the right majority. Parties which actually taken seriously when we like them or not, because they might be parts of the government institution. So next year we have two possibilities next year. The one possibility is that the ANC does get a majority. And I think if the ANC does get a majority, it's going to be a small majority. Even that creates opportunities. Because the party which is governing the country with 51% has to be far more open to citizens' demands than one that's not 57%, let alone the 60-something% which the ANC used to do. So that's the one scenario, that you have an ANC which wins but with a very small majority. And I think people need to be alive to those opportunities. The other possibility, of course, is that the ANC goes below 50%. Now, if that happens, the first possibility is that the ANC forms a coalition with another party, and then the ANC governs in that way. If that happens, once again, my point is that it creates opportunities which weren't there before, because you're dealing with more than one party. However, it's very possible that the ANC won't be able to form a coalition. If you look at what's been happening in some of our cities, the parties which are big enough to form a coalition with the ANC have not been willing to do it. And I'm talking particularly about the EFF and the IFP, who both have enough votes to form governments with the ANC, and neither of them, for different reasons, has been particularly eager. So we could have a situation next year in which the ANC gets, say, 47% or whatever, and cannot form a government because it doesn't have a coalition. So you're then talking about non-ANC parties forming a government. But that's not going to be very easy either, because although the ANC is dropping in support, go back to those local elections that I mentioned in 2021, the ANC got 46%, which is its lowest ever. But the DA, which is the next biggest party, got 20%. And the EFF, which is the third biggest party, got 12%. So in other words, we're still in a situation where the biggest party may be no longer representing a majority of people who vote, but is still double the size of the second biggest party and 4 times the size of the third biggest party. And what that means is that it's very difficult for the other parties to form coalitions, because you need lots and lots of parties to join the coalitions to get up to 50%. And that means that you give a lot of power to small parties. And you may have been reading about the Patriotic Alliance, which has been particularly good, and it's a party which mainly represents people who are classified coloured under the concept. And they've been quite good at maneuvering so that they get good positions by leading coalitions and get that, etc. But there's another issue which means that this is going to be even more difficult than usual, because in some cases, the opposition have been able, non-ANC parties have been able to form a coalition, because the EFF has decided not to vote against that coalition. But the DA decided a few weeks ago to declare war on the EFF and declare that it's public enemy number 1, and that means that the EFF will probably not refuse or not allow a DA to govern. And that means that there will be no opposition government either. So we could have a situation next year in which nobody can form a government. Incidentally, if we do have any government in this situation, what I said earlier applies, because it will be a government of many parties. There will be all sorts of people who engage in activism, who strategize this and so on. There will be all sorts of points of pressure there, which can be used effectively. But we could find ourselves in a situation where nobody can form. Yeah.
Sorry, Prof. Siyama sonke? Ningalali yiyo le. Yiyo le. Potential majority, still opportunities, Payana. No? Potential ANC loses majority, but still have numbers. But because of the way it engages as new political players, maybe we have trouble forming even an opposition government. And all these two parties coming together and moving us after elections. But to profit, even in all of these circumstances, there's opportunity for Tina to be doing something that says these are the issues And if this is your count, then Abantu will come with you. See, Amansong? So regardless of how things go, but we must be in the workings of that. We're not going to watch it happen. There's always opportunity for our own activism to give us the things that we said we wanted, to protect our communities. So, okay. So no lala, comrades, here. Okay, Prof. Just try to make sure that we're ready for the revolution. Isa. You can come through.
Okay, now, just to follow on from that point, my question was, what happens if no one will come? And it just illustrates the point I'm trying to make, because what will happen there is that, incidentally, at some point somebody's going to have to change the constitution, but I'm sure that's not of much interest. It's a technical point. And the reason I say that is that all of what I'm describing is going to have to play itself out over a while, over a few months. And the Constitution at the moment says that it all has to be sorted out in 2 years. You can't really sort it out in 2 years. So somebody is going to have to change that, but you can leave that to the politicians. But what I think will happen is that there will be pressure on the parties to form a government. Because there are very strong interests in this country who don't want there to be no government. It's probably in nobody's interest that there should be no government. And here's where the politics and the strategy become very important, beyond the points that I made. Because how does South Africa work at the moment? When I say there's going to be pressure, whose voices are heard in this situation? And the voices which are going to be heard are very bluntly, they're the voices of business, they're the voices of the media, they're the voices, to put it bluntly, of the people who live in the south. And it is very possible in that situation that there will be huge pressure from the suburbs and from business, etc., to say, no, you've got to sort out the government, and that will obviously influence the way in which politicians behave. Now, that certainly means that there's a very high possibility that in that particular scenario, you land up with a government which is very much the kind of government that the suburbs want. It is not necessarily the government that everybody else wants. Incidentally, I mean, just as an example, trying to take this out of the political party contest, because, basic to my argument is that it's not based on support for any party. But there would be, for example, quite strong pressure for an ACGA coalition, which might well, be very hostile to workers' rights, not all that. Not as interested in the board as listening to what people at the grassroots have to say. So it becomes a sort of challenge. Obviously, I have to stress, I'm not predicting any of these things. These things that will be happening. But you don't want to land yourself in a situation, if you are an activist, where you wake up one morning and these things are happening, and you haven't thought about them, you haven't worked out how you want to respond. So those are the likely outcomes for next year. I've talked about the opportunities. There are obviously threats in this, and I've just been talking about one of the threats. The other threats is that, look, we don't have a tradition of people putting pressure on political parties. And as long as we don't have that tradition of people putting pressure on political parties, you see the kind of things that you may have been seeing. Your meeting's taking place in the Western Cape, where there hasn't been coalition negotiations in Cape Town for quite a long time. But if you look at the coalitions which have negotiations which have been going on, the kind of politics which have been going on in Gauteng and some other parts of partly KZN as well, what you see is that this entire situation in which you have parties competing with each other, and coalitions forming and coalitions collapsing, is happening without any participation at all from anybody except the politician. So no politician ever occurs. Well, one politician, the Mashaba from actually South Africa, said that he consulted his voters, but I don't believe it. No evidence that he really did. But the rest of them didn't even pretend. So you have these people appearing on the media, etc., saying that they formed the coalition, they haven't formed the coalition. And the idea that citizens should be part of this doesn't really occur to them. And obviously in a situation like that, the danger is that this becomes a cozy club of politicians who make deals with each other and just exclude citizens. But of course that can only happen if people let it happen. So that is a challenge for activism. And the other challenge in this situation, and I talked about it very briefly when I talked about Possibilities DA coalition, is that although we haven't dealt with many of the issues which we need to deal with, which affect the lives of ordinary South Africans, we have been living since 1994, in a climate in which at least people may not do anything about it, but at least certain values and certain principles are regarded as mainstream. And what I'm talking about here is that basic principles of the rights of workers, the rights of people living in poverty to be heard, that you don't say you're implementing policies which are anti-poor, anti-worker, etc. That has been broadly accepted, and that the voices who are against that have been quite large. The danger in a situation like this is that they don't become marginal. So we have political parties now. They're not, they're not massive, but they are political. But they have seats in councils, and they have media coverage. Who are anti-trade union, views on crime, which are let's just execute them all and use violence, etc. And that is kind of breaking the mold to a certain extent. So you have voices here in favour of rights, in favour of provision. I mean, the patriotic about rights, it doesn't only have people classified coloured in its leadership, but a lot of its appeal to a section of voters is, we are coloured people and that's different from everybody else, etc. So this, there is a particular person who writes in newspapers who's claiming that, we're now about to be, because of our electoral system, we're now about to be somebody like Donald Trump, he totally, racist and anti-poor. I mean, that's nonsense. But what isn't nonsense is that you can't take for granted anymore, which I think people did do, that the kind of values that underpin work for justice in this country are going to be accepted by everybody in this situation. And it is a challenge, because I think if you scrape the surface in this country, you may find that a lot of the enlightened attitudes which you hear on anything from workers' rights through to equality of men and women, etc., that they aren't as deeply held as people pretend they are. So it's not all it's not all potential. There are very strong opportunities, and of course there is always possibilities which I think everybody has to deal with. They're in a situation in which no party can form a government, and you have the kind of fluidity I'm talking about. Where the whole political party thing just starts to unravel, and it's just not clear who is in charge, and you may not like who's in charge at the moment, but I can tell you from experience around the world that having nobody in charge doesn't actually make the lives of anybody living in poverty any easier.
Yeah.
So just to sum up, I mean, in a sense, what I was, when I mention the threats, there is no threat which I'm mentioning here which is inevitable. And that's why I talk about opportunity, because any of the threats that I talk about here can be resisted and can be averted by activism. But, and that's how we started this conversation, but that activism has to take into account that we are living in a new environment which requires new strategies and which thankfully does open up new opportunity. And hopefully this small contribution will enable you to think through how you respond to that strategically and how you hopefully take advantage of the opportunity. So I think I'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Prof. Nivile mos, ne? I'm not going to do another recap. What I'm going to do is that I'm just going to allow, okay, benfunu fakuma Janet, ne? So that says if so two with enough time and space, and then get on questions at the end to both. Is that fine? Yeah. So we sing is unequitable. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to let that sit a little bit because you know what I'm saying. Ma Janet, welcome. Ngosi Prof, ne? Thank you for that.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, darling. But this is what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to start off with that precursor that you did last week. Because in Mamelani, comrades, ne? We also have an opportunity to listen to different perspectives on the moment, but abantu that are coming from spaces that are legitimate and are useful to help us think about these questions. Does it make sense? So ndiyafuna sizamuzi apply if you needs like a body break and you're there, like get some water and you just stand in the corners there. Yabon? We're not in class, but stay here because this is the thing. He's like a mother. You can go ahead, Janet.
Okay, thanks. I think that hopefully I will be able to complement what Steve has said, because I think it feeds into a number of the points and not take a lot of time. But what I wanted to start with is just really to emphasize the fact that I am speaking to you as somebody who comes from the civil society sector and sees myself very much as that being my home, and not as anybody who has any position or mandate from the Commission, and I don't speak here as a past commissioner or an aspirant commissioner or anything like that. So I really, that was my disclaimer, and I really want to emphasize that these views are entirely my own and nobody else's. Having said that, maybe just to pick up on a few points that Steve has raised. You know, we are going into a highly contested space, and as he has said, there have been all sorts of predictions. There have been predictions that, you know, there will be no majority. There have been predictions that indeed the only reason in some areas that a particular party, whether it be the ANC or any other party, wins is because of manipulations. And I think what the worry is in terms of the threat to this particular election is that in that space of huge contestation, the possibility for the focus to be shifted from the bad behaviors of political parties, of contestants, of their supporters, to those who are actually doing the management of elections in the form of not just the full-time staff of the Commission, but in terms of people who are there as independent observers, etc., the possibility to shift that attention away from the contestants' behavior to the management of the elections is a real possibility. And as much as there is a very important role that people who are independent.
No. Prof, are you still there?
Am I still here? Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just
But I
trying.
think that is frozen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mama Janet is in the Eastern Cape. Yenzeka laa nto. No, that's my home. It happens, that thing. We freeze, we come back. Can we just do a recap while we wait for Mama Janet to come back? No? The first thing is that she spoke about not being a former or aspirant commissioner. Ne? Uthetha ngantoni? Ebeyi-commissioner yena and is up for a second term as a commissioner pi IEC. Siyaman song? The Independent Electoral Commission. Nguye umakhulu bhaso wapha. Are we together? But at the moment, akaphangeli phayana at the moment, ne? But is up for appointment of a second term. And then you get recommended, and then you go through many interviews. So ukla process. So let's just be careful to understand her as representing herself and her views as part of the sector. Abanye abantu in the room may know Janet from being in the sector. It's okay. You're all good. So
I'm sorry.
So Mama Janet ba, there's a potential threat uqala ngayo, ne? Because it's a highly contested election. It's not a joke, that thing. That's why I keep saying stay here, because we're not going to have this opportunity again. Uthi ke ngoku, part of the threat is that abantu, we spoke about the unethical campaigning. We already know it's coming. Uthi, there's great potential for abantu as leaders of these political parties to behave very badly, but because Tina and the way the media operates in the cycle get distracted, abantu are going to want the distraction to be around the management of the election. Kubani management of the election dim, because look, I am the observer of the voting station close to my house. Does it make a? Are you following? So uzamuthi in that potential of a threat, masibe verguns. Is that the right word? Okay, thank you. Isaac, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. You know, as you have so often identified, even in this time I've been with you now, the difference between rural and urban areas is very great, including in terms of connectivity, which is why, given that I'm in rural Eastern Cape, I'm having the challenges that many of you are very familiar with. So my apologies. So that was really the first thing that I think that the issue of protecting communities has got to be the issue of having the vigilance, particularly on the contestants. And the vigilance on the contestants, whether they be parties, individuals, or their supporters, has got to be clear in the sense that, you know, there's also a real danger to members of communities physically. We know people come in, we know that there are assassinations of leaders of communities.
Yeah, I think we should take off the nice things. Okay. She's already also starting to add to those threats by saying, I mean, I'm thinking about Amakabane se KZN, parts of the Eastern Cape, also a phenomenon, where people die during election season. We must also be thinking about other bantu that are part of the management of the elections or observer. Do they not become it's an English word for scapegoats and be part of the danger of the moment. Come through, Prof. Okay. Do we all want to just stand up for a moment? Nizohlala kanjani? Okay, let me stand then.
Okay, that's
Are you texting? Can you just tell her to keep her video off, please, Nick? I have 1%. Prof, I thought you were trying to come in earlier. I forgot that I was muted. Do you want to say something? You. I thought you were wanting to come in. No? Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, I'm just aware of the problem. I have no.
Okay, Kibao. Okay, so after this input that's coming, ne, I'm not going to do a full sum up. Ne? Mamelani, comrades, I'm not going to do a full sum up. There's a pauser to the room. So I'd like people to already start just jotting down their questions. Ushak's got the first one here, and then we'll go live. Okay? So just ready those inputs.
hi everybody.
Okay,
Yeah,
Daniel.
I think you could keep your video off.
Yes, I'm going to do that. I'm sorry, it really just is an issue of location. Anyway, my apologies again. I was hoping that, okay, so in the idea of what needs to be changed and so on, many people who will come to communities are coming with heaps of promises. It's not something people are not used to. I think what's really important is that some of the convincing of people to participate often centers on the extent to which people can be held to their promises. And that presumes that in a system we have opportunities for people who are dwellers within our shacks and people who don't have the means and who don't live in suburbs, etc. It presumes that they have the possibility of recall, they have the possibility of active engagement. And I think, you know, that is something that in practice has not been demonstrated and certainly is part of what needs to be looked at going forward. So the idea that some of the decisions or some of the convincing of people in marginalized, and I'm using that term in the sense of people who are part of, you know, unemployed communities who don't live in the suburbs, people who live outside of that space where there is serious consideration given to their pressure, but who live who are the majority of this country, those people to be making decisions or to vote or not to vote on the basis that it is going to bring the kind of change that they want to see. I'm not suggesting that that is not an important aspiration, but I'm not sure that after 30 years it's going to be that will enable people to be convinced. In my view, what is much more important is the focus on the numbers. Now, the Electoral Commission produces after every election, so the local government elections of 2021 are no different, what is called an atlas of elections. And it's a very useful document in terms of mobilization, because what it does is it breaks down per voting district exactly who voted, age group, gender, etc., as well as the number of people who voted relative to the percentage of those who registered. And it also has the possibility of engaging who did not register, who ought or who has the possibility of voting. In other words, if one can begin to talk to communities in terms of numbers, it will be really important in this sense, in that if a community can say our numbers matter for this province, and we, because of our actual community organisation, have shifted those numbers from 2021, where the numbers were X, to 2024, where the numbers are Y. This is a community that you cannot ignore. This is a community that, regardless of anything else, you have to take seriously. Not because it voted for this or that party, or this or that individual, but because the numbers are what you've got to see here. And I think that that kind of messaging within communities, that communities are now saying, we're going to show our muscle, that as numbers we count in this contestation. I think that that's a very important point of departure.
Okay, sorry,
The
ma'am.
third thing, Sorry.
If you could just hold it right there. Iyavakala, ne? Are we hearing the things that we were discussing end of yesterday in the morning? Part of the opportunity Appa is we must be clear. Let's tell Appa we don't have the potential of mass mobilization right now. Even if it was 50 organizations to the streets, ne? We're not going to fill a church square. Kodwa kuthiwa apha there's numbers, there's also opportunity to say to political parties, nge-issues zethu, thina singabahlali, nansi membership base yethu, and these parts of Durban will be voting as per. Iyavakala? Okay. Keep going, ma. So hold on before you come in. So Dizamuguti, let's tear up as free strategy and tactics. See, we're getting affirmed in our conversation, the language of how we talk about what we want in this period, because we're not going to watch the elections happen, must include the story of the people are with us in mass. Iyavakala, ne? At the same time, economy misconception, ayonyani comrades, even inside of the empty promises we can expect from our political parties, that we do indeed have that active and direct ability to recall abantu who aren't acting in good faith, your community yethu. So how do we create that kind of system or culture of politics from this moment? We all agreed here yesterday when we were at the different stations that the ability to say no to a political leader doesn't really exist in real terms. Namhlanje. So, ngoku is an opportunity to make sure that can actually happen. Unjani, we have to do it together. Ne? Okay, keep going, ma'am.
Thanks. I think one of the important things is for the messaging about why people should register, and that's kind of now, between now and when the date of the election is proclaimed, and why people should vote. And part of that also is to correct some of the messaging that kind of comes from others. So part of the messaging that comes from others goes along the lines of, if you don't vote, you can't complain, that kind of messaging. And really, first of all, that's nonsense. If you vote, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't need to complain. I mean, we all know many voters have every need to complain. But secondly, I mean, there's nothing that requires you to vote in order to have rights of citizens, to demand, to expect certain things, and of course, to complain. So I think that that's why it's about saying our needs are not prioritized, and in that, we need to assert that our strength is what is going to bring this country to have legitimate elections where participation gives the legitimacy. And our numbers are what made that legitimacy possible. And so that's the kind of messaging I'm talking about, because, I I'm not convinced that we have a system at the moment, particularly at local level, but also provincial and national level, which really has got any of the elements of ensuring that people who are not, as Steve put it, living in the suburbs, that those people really have got the necessary agency to intervene between elections. The important point there, I think, as well, is to emphasize that not voting and having elections which are not legitimate is not going to open new space for people in circumstances of the shacks, or circumstances in rural areas. It's simply going to open more space, and I would argue that we've seen that during this period of uncertainty in local government, with the different kind of coalitions and the gaps in coalitions and so on. What we've seen is that gaps emerge in which the kind of the ongoing corruptions and manipulations and so on are not only continuing, but new actors equally problematic are coming in. So I think what's important to emphasize again is that I don't believe that people in circumstances of poverty without employment gain any benefit from no government. I know that often we say to people, the reason that there are uprisings in different parts of the country is because people in those areas, and then I'm using the term, have nothing left to lose. Well, actually, if you do go to parts of the world where there has been little or no governance, there's a lot that can be lost. Even within our own African region, and there are countries, where war is still preventing any kind of stability and any kind of certainty about elections. And that means that people who are most vulnerable lose more. So the intense kind of contestation, I think, has another real threat. And again, I do agree with Steve's perspective that, there's opportunity that lies there. And that is the threat of violence, of anger, of destruction. And I think there it's so important for people in the communities to be able to play an absolutely invaluable role in terms of managing that conflict. But to manage it at the time of elections, or as the sort of last couple of weeks of campaigning are taking place, means to be able to be in there sooner rather than later. And it seems to me that, again, there are systems that are in place in terms of the Electoral Commission around dispute resolution and so on. For example, if some of the contestants do what is clearly unacceptable, or if members of community activists are threatened and in some cases are killed or forced to flee, it creates levels of violence. And I think, understandably, and I think that it's important because of that for the level of organization in communities, and it will be those communities where we know that there is a footprint of activists within which it's in those communities that I suppose the most important starts will be made to actually get people on board to look at potential mediation within areas and within regions that are possible in order to be able to manage the violence which is sometimes also invoked or brought about because people who are contesting, again, want to deflect attention from what they're doing and want to create a situation where if they don't feel they, as the particular contestant, are going to get support, would rather dominate by fear, causing people not to vote. And again, that's something that we equally need to avoid. I think people really need to feel that they've got that level of control.
Sorry, Ma.
Then,
Sorry, hang on, please, Ma. So, let's just khangela strategy and tactics, ne? One of the things that Janet is putting to us about Utibana, where there is unrest in our communities, ngenxa yezi elections, sometimes it's a distraction, sometimes fueled by izinto zokuhlala, ne? Uti, one of the roles that we could play as a civil society, as these movements that are activists, that are legitimate, sithenjiwe ukuhlala, is to play a mediation role when these things happen. Ukwazi ukuthi no war is what's happening here in the best interest of the people, and in fact, who are these people leading this thing? Does it make sense? Uthi ke ngoku awuyenzi lento on the dawn of elections. Because we are already people's movements, this kind of role and the preparation of communities to expect izinto ezinje must be happening in the build-up to the vote. Are we together? Abanye abantu bethu ke abafana Henrietta already play these roles in communities. So there's an encouragement when thinking about strategy and tactics that connect with ukuhlala, that isn't just about the political parties. Let's see if we can't become the people that the community understands, can help them decipher truth from lie, nonsense, from really a people's politics more. See, ne? Okay. You can keep going, Janet.
thanks. Okay, and then I wanted to add a couple of points to those that Steve has already made about, the possibility of what can emerge. I mean, it might be that there is a majority party, but it is, as has been said, it's unlikely it would be a significant majority from what we've seen. But I mean, I'm not a fortune teller, but there's also every possibility for coalitions, and our experience of coalitions to date has been that they just are dysfunctional. And many actors in this are giving an impression that you can regulate a coalition, well in advance, and you can even have legislation that can regulate coalitions. And there are countries, by the way, who have got legislation, laws that are put in place to help with trying to get coalitions to function. The issue is that if coalitions are there is always going to be some possibility for shifts and realignments and so on. And that's not just within the South African local government context recently, but it's everywhere. It's in other parts of our continent, it's in other parts of the world. So the issue about what happens during coalitions that, for want of, just don't function well, break up and so on, is that what very often happens is that independent voices, both from within political parties, but certainly if there are going to be any independent candidates, or very small parties, are the ones that are either entirely marginalized or the ones that are used to be the main puppets, because they are then elevated to a position which does not reflect their base on the ground. And the only way they retain that position, and there are politicians, as we know, that are keen to retain position rather than necessarily to advance the interests of people in this country, that then becomes the way in which they have levers. So what can be done about that? Again, it seems to me that there is an opportunity there, an opportunity to identify people within political parties and people who may emerge in very small political party situations or even as independent candidates. There's an opportunity for people to ensure that those who are performing well are identified as people worthy of support so that they are not able very easily to be marginalized. And I think that that becomes very important to begin to understand who are the politicians in any room, who are the politicians and what is their record, and to call that record out as it affects communities. It's more relevant, I think, or more, maybe not relevant is the wrong word, it's possibly more easier to do in a local government space, but I think in a provincial and national space, it can also be something of great significance. We don't call out the lies and the misrepresentations of individual politicians sufficiently, and I'm not here just talking about people who happen to be ministers or premiers or presidents or whatever, but even just the individual politicians. And as a result, some of the people who we do think are good people, who are even on political party lists, not that we control that, do not necessarily get the support that I think they could get. I think, you know, the last sort of set of issues that I think I would just want people to not lose sight of is that, you know, this is a moment, and it's a moment that is there because we really don't know what is going to happen in these elections. That is what makes them so critical. And in that, as I've said, there are lots of opportunities, but the most important opportunity, I think, is that it gives us to re-galvanize local community organization that needs to carry us way beyond these elections. And part of it will be to look at what is wrong with our systems, and there are many issues that are wrong, but part of it, I think, is to entrench an understanding of as many of you in the room have got a lot of experience in particular communities, but it's a message that needs to spread, is that the power that community organization has to better things within the community, not just to better things in terms of having greater leverage on people who occupy elected office at great expense to the taxpayer, even though they may not warrant it in terms of the positive impact that they have yet to make. So I really was privileged also to listen to what Steve said, and those are just a couple of additional thoughts. He did raise a number of things that I really do wholeheartedly agree with, and I hope that in these few remarks I've given some additional aspects for people to think about for your discussions. Let me hand it over now, and I can engage further in discussions and so on. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Janice. Would it be possible for us to switch the lights on, please? I think the ambience is doing a lot here for us. And Nkosi, thank you very much, Prof, and thank you very much, Comrade Janet. Imande, comrades, in this last input, Janet, I keep thinking about that thing that says there are no binaries. Well, maybe, I think in traditional science they probably are, but But I mean, two truths can exist at once. Because another opportunity here is that siyayazi into yobana the big bullies of our political network, political parties, are going to marginalize the independents and the smaller parties. So if there's already opportunity now, masiba engage or independents or alternative movement or smaller parties and say, now it's a line of march according to our issues. So that when they become marginalized, they've not got our membership base as support, but they've got the people as a support. Does it make sense? So it doesn't have to be maybe a public endorsement of X party, but just bringing on board a smaller or independent and going, if you run on these issues, there's a base of people that might find expression in you. And to watch their participation inside parliament on the other side of the vote. Lamd was carrying a mandate from our issues and we had already put them to them. So maybe there's potential to protect how that space works. Is that fair? Okay, I think that was a very important intervention. Okay, we can shoot with those questions. We've got 11 minutes for all of the things. So we'll start with you, Shak. Maybe let's note 4, ne? And do it, maybe 3 is that's a bit more witchy and in line with my politics. Let's do it in 3, so we'll do 1, okay, 2, okay, 3. Just for us to utilize our legs. And Funo's up. Can never be me interpreting the question, Sana. He's up, come speak from the computer.
Okay.
Is that fine, eh? Otherwise I'm gonna have to do the thing again and then surely someone's daughter.
Comrade, I think Comrade Steve, Comrade
Just
Janet.
introduce yourself, Shak. Eh?
Okay, sure. All right. My name is Mishek Mamula, National Coordinator of Mining Affected Communities United in Action, short is Makua. My name is Mishek Mamula from Makua, National Coordinator of Makua. Thanks, Stephen and Janet, for the information. I think it's very important for us to have this information since we are going to face these elections for 2024 from an informed base. So it's a very important role to do. So what happened is that my question will be, in fact, or other opportunities, it will be maybe possibly if we start or not wait for that time of voting, but we start now engaging these different political parties to force them to say, look, we're having issues of service delivery, insufficient infrastructure, no skill development issues. And if this is not going to happen by now, we might have to not to, engage you in your votes and so on. Because definitely each and every political party now is worried about 2024. Can it be one of the strategies that we use now to say, let's start to show us your work now before that time comes in? I think, Janet, you raised a very important part of mediation when there's voting starting. That is, we should be able to say after the votes, we now know who really causing the trouble, because we always sit back and expect people to give us information. So it's very important for us to engage and be able to say who are the real people, because in some instances, the very same people that maybe we want to see them in power, they can be sent by other people to disrupt that voting time to make sure that those people don't get into power. And that will be a problem. I thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Shak. Okay. Isa, okay. Hi, Ninja. Nina, guys, the number 3. Come closer. Isa, please. Isa, that's okay. Being about Sis Nandando. Isa, come. Closer. Ngingaphela sana ku facilitator.
Sozodolika ke. Okay, mina ngingubusisiwe wakwanzakayi ndisuka kwi-ICORA, which is the Independent Komani Residents Association eKomani. Mna ndifuna uvela pha kumama uJeanette.
A little bit louder, ba?
Okay. Ndifuna uvela pha kumama uJeanette, kulapha athi kumele sibafake si-engage okanye sibafake okanye sibe kunye nabo o-independent candidate. Ndifuna uqonda ukuba ikhona na i-room to accommodate the bill, because the electoral bill inako uku-oppressa i-opportunity yokuba bona basebenze ngendlela e-right, kwisense yoba kwi-assembly what do you call it, i-legislature. I feel ba abekho accommodated enough, bayacinezeleka, and ihamba ke ngoku ibuyele kwi-society yethu, because in as much as basizabathanda siba electe as baba basimele babe zii-candidates ezisimelayo phayana, bazawucinezeleka when it comes to the numbers, because now umzekelo, how do I put this? But i-numbers zabo ziyatyeka, andiyazi ke nizoyitolika, ziyatyeka, unlike uba mhlawumbi ibi-political party or an organization. So iba unfair to them indaba ye-numbers and how they calculate or how they beweya into yobana abo bantu mabawe or not. And then I feel ba i-voice ke ngoku iyacutheka kwicala lethu. I don't know if I'm clear. Thank you, ne?
Right, thank you both, Stephen and Jeanette. It's Nondando from Ephesus. So a couple of comments and questions, and I guess to both of you. The first big broad assumption that I drew from both your inputs was a broad stroke underlying assumption that the ANC can self-correct somehow. That if we bargain with it, if we bring the numbers, if we show the voting patterns and use that as a platform from which we launch, that we are able to engage with it in ways that then it responds and responds in better and public spirited ways. And yet we know for a fact that the ANC is a party in crisis, and that it has failed, or it continues to demonstrate its inability to self-correct. And even in those places where its numbers had been threatened, it had not gotten its shit together, for want of a better word.
Bless it.
And so this assumption, this underlying assumption that the party somehow, when we engage it, is gonna get its act together, I think we just really need to deal with it. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing for me, which I would have been interested to hear, particularly from your input, Steve, is really just, and we're really grappling and trying to understand this notion of trauma-laden voting. And how people, even in spaces where the comrades, independent opposition parties or otherwise, where they're messing up and messing up royally, we will still vote them in power because of the traumas of the past. We will not give our vote to somebody that doesn't look like us and who is likely to take us back to a place where we once were. And so this notion of race-based but also trauma-laden voting patterns that we've seen in the past, and the extent to which we're able to engage that and build consciously of that. And the third thing is this notion of independent candidates and what happens, and drawing from what we've seen over time in local government. There is something about the beast in the system that changes even the good comrades once they get in there. And I do think that we need to really think about that and know that that's not the panacea that's going to help us, because there's something about that system that changes our good guys. Then my final input is not necessarily to you, but also to the room. I do think that we need to be very alive to the who, the what, and where of civil society. All of us here. Movements, the social justice space, all of us in our different forms. Because the geopolitics currently have and are going to impact money flows to South Africa in particularly. We're beginning to see a whole lot of money that was coming from the global north being halted. And so our space and our ability to mobilize is about to get impacted in severe ways. And that has implications for our ability to fetch others, our ability to connect in spaces like this, and to have these conversations. And so when we're saying we'll fetch others, we'll broker, I think we need to do that grounded in reality, but also grounded in the realization that we are at the cusp of a big crisis that's about to hit our sector, and mobilizing, particularly mobilizing in rural South Africa, requires some resource. Thanks.
Shine. Okay. Do you have space to answer? Anyone can start. Ima, well, just sorry, before that happens, I just wanted to be mindful that we've got Zimasa on the line as well. Zimasa, you can type in there, Lidava. All things are possible. Okay. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Who? Which one?
Let's start with Janet, Prof. Just because she's a woman. Okay,
Steve, I'll just start, because I think that it will be probably good if you kind of do some putting together. Look, I think that maybe without sort of going one by one in terms of the questions, I think that first of all, the idea of engaging political parties, saying, you know, we need this, and if you do this or you don't do this, it will impact on 2024. I don't know, unlike Nontando, am not necessarily convinced of anything to do with anybody's self-correction. On the contrary, I think what I'm saying is, and maybe let me make this my real point here, is that I think that people who are elected into political positions have been able to not do many things they should have done and to do many things that are wrong, is to some extent because, first of all, our own community structures became very, very weak in the post-1994 period. You know, many people who were in extremely active, very, very engaged rural structures, for example, in the women's sector, closed shop to become members of structures, for example, of the ANC, and it wasn't necessarily only of the ANC. Now, the failure to retain those community structures means that that very engaged local voice, because it's not in the suburbs, but it's also no longer as organized as it used to be, it doesn't have the impact that it could have, and it's, in some instances, I'm not trying to glorify and say there were no problems for civil society in the past, but it doesn't have necessarily the same impact that it did have and that it used to have. And I think the trade union sector is just one example of that. So that is my point of departure. So if we go to parties and we say, we need this in the community, as Misha was proposing, it's not a wrong thing necessarily. But I can almost hear what the politician is going to say. I mean, the politician is going to say, you know, we'll have a meeting, and then we're going to draw a plan, and then we're going to draw a policy, and then I'm going to raise it at the council, or I'm going to raise it here, there, and everywhere, and then etc., etc., and then by then we're not even in the 1924, the 2024 elections. We'll already be going to 2026 by the time all the meetings have taken place. I'm being cynical, and I'm sorry, but it's really what I think we know. So I'm not saying don't do it, but what's more important is that whoever you invite to your community sees in the room that they can't move in that community because without the community's consent, because there's so much organization. So I hope that that, in a way, is answering not just Misha, but also Nortando's concern about the assumptions of self-correction. I don't believe self-correction. I believe that communities have to have that local organization that is so important. The second thing I think that I wanted just to touch on, and then I'm going to maybe comment just on the third thing that Nontando said, was what Sisiwe was saying in relation to the Electoral Amendment Act. It's an act now, Sisiwe, and there are people who are taking it to court, and I don't know yet whether the court will deal with it. The reality is that unless the court deals with it, which I'm not sure that it will before these elections, this is the act that we've got. This is the act that, with all its problems. And we're not going to get that act changed anytime soon, and I certainly don't think that the act deals with all of the issues that people have to the electoral system and all of the concerns. I think what it does do is it makes it very clear that the current system, the current Amendment Act, only applies to 2024, doesn't apply beyond that. And I think there's a lot of serious thinking that must happen around our election system to improve it in ways that give more space for us to be sure that individuals are good individuals, have the correct levels of support. And lastly, in terms of people being alive to the possibility that civil society will receive less for doing important things like mobilization, I think that is true, but I also do think that we shouldn't, being alive to money from the global north is also being alive to global money, which may well be promoting, for example, what Steve was talking about. If there is a coalition that really doesn't prioritize workers' interests and so on, whatever the shape of that coalition is, because the global north, when we talk about the global north and the money that it pumps in even to political parties, it's not doing that outside of the ambitions of those who have means. It's not doing that for poor people, in my experience. So I think we need to be vigilant not only about the possible negative impact on activism in terms of civil society spaces, but also vigilant on where that money will be used, and where it can possibly be used is to promote things that are not at all in the interests of people who are poor, in the interests of workers, in the interests of people who are unemployed. Those would be my kind of comments. I think Steve is probably going to be able to pull a lot of the issues together. Thanks.
Thank you. You can come in, Prof.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so, look, I'm a bit alarmed that Nontando thinks that I was trying to convince people that the ANC will self-correct. I mean, that was absolutely not part of my argument at all. I didn't express any opinion on that, and the reason I didn't express any opinion on that is that I don't think it really matters in terms of what I have to say, because what I do have to say is that I don't think, I mean, obviously if people have preferences, that's their right, we live in a democracy. But my argument is not that one should put faith in any of the political parties. It is that we should regard the fact that political parties compete with each other as an opportunity for influence, for change. And part of that is that we actually get rid of the thinking, which I do have a problem with. And in a sense, what I was going to say is the opposite of what Nontando heard, because I think that part of our problem is that we're all still obsessed with the ANC, quite frankly. And even if, like Nontando, we don't like the ANC, we still have to, and that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. It's across the board, from left to right, and centre as well. That everybody in this country who participates in politics seems to still be absolutely obsessed with the ANC, in the sense that, is this about the ANC self-correcting, or is it not about the ANC self-correcting? The ANC is a political party, and we are entering a political organisation, we are entering, that was part of my argument, we are entering a reality in which it's going to be entirely clear that it's a political organisation, like any other political organisation, and it competes for support, and maybe it'll win elections, or maybe it won't win elections. But we need to start looking at it as what it really is, which is simply one among many political organisations. To deal with the specifics of what people have to say. So on Misha's point, I'm a little bit, I think he's right. I think that it has to start now. But I think that it has to start now in a particular way. And let me make it clear that none of what I said, because it's easy to get the wrong end of the stick. None of what I said suggests that we should start trying to convince particular political parties to be the vehicle of what we're trying to achieve. So in other words, I'm not suggesting that we have to go to political party A and say, well, if you do this, we'll support you, and political party B, if you do that, we'll support you. I don't think it's necessary for people's organizations to start promising support to anyone. What I am trying to say, and I think Janet put it quite well, when she talked about being a presence on the ground, is that it's important to position yourself in a way in which they realize that they have to take you seriously, because if they don't take you seriously, they will lose out. And if you are going to engage directly with them, which I think is a good idea, I'm simply saying that it has to be on the basis of demanding firm commitments. So if they want to shun things to committees, then they're not giving you a firm commitment.
Yeah.
So a firm commitment doesn't mean, for example, I'm not trying to tell you what you should demand, but a firm commitment doesn't mean, I think poverty is a bad idea, which politicians love saying in this country. Are you prepared to commit to a basic income? Are you prepared to say you support a basic income grant? Or whatever else, housing rights, whatever. So in other words, it's not to be a case of trying to get which they love doing, making these broad promises. It's a question of trying to get them to actually commit that if they're in a position of influence, they will do X, Y, and Z, and if they don't do X, Y, and Z, obviously the community will know, and you will make it your business to tell the community that they like to. So it's that kind of engagement that I'm talking about. And I think that's central to what I'm trying to say, is not, the ANC is no longer the only game in town, let's find a new game in town. let's find a new way of engaging, which assumes that nobody is the only game in town. And that, the answer to the solution of the ANC is not to find another party which you could be the solution to the problem of time. It's to position yourself strategically so that all the parties who are trying to compete for votes and the people you speak for are able to take you seriously. Just to look at some of the specifics, the question of, I'm amused by this question of what Montana called traumatic voting, race-based voting. If you look at voting in this country right now, we've been fed for years they base their votes on, what Montana calls traumatic or race-based voting. The competition, for better or for worse, the competition for political parties, between political parties in townships and shack settlements, is actually pretty vigorous if you look at it. It's not, people are spreading their support among a variety of parties all over the country. There is a place in South Africa where people vote on the basis of race and on the basis of whether you're part of our team or not. And that's in the suburbs, okay? By my calculation, if you look at the suburbs of the major cities, and you take away the fact that there are domestic workers there who live on the premises of some people and who therefore vote in those areas, but you probably don't vote for the DA, then you're probably looking at a vote for the DA in the suburbs of over 90%, in some places 95%. Now that sounds pretty much race-based like to me, but that's not the reality in the townships anymore. So I think that, seeing that presumably everybody here is concerned the majority of South Africans, I don't think it achieves very much to sort of misrepresent the way people are voting at the moment. And I think part of the opportunity is precisely that people are voting for all sorts of parties. And that gets me on to two final points, which I think are important. The issue which was raised in certain independent candidates. Look, I obviously, if an independent candidate is running and the law says that there should be independent candidates and the Constitution calls it stronger, it is important that the system be entirely fair to independent candidates, and that's obviously a legitimate concern. But I really doubt, how much store we should put by the ability of this change to change anything else quite greatly. I don't think terribly many independent candidates are likely to get elected. I mean, this particular individual who had something to do with the formation of My Vote Counts, which is announced that he's an independent candidate. Well, he's a nationally known figure, and maybe he will get the 25 or 30,000 votes that he needs. But if he does, I don't think there are going to be too many others likely. So the reality, whatever changes are made, is that we are going to be dealing with political parties rather than independent candidates. And I think that people need to take that into account. But my final point is and came out some of the points which were made by Montana, Janet, when she responded. I think there's far too much attention at the moment. And Montana said, well, the system changes people into bad guys. I don't think the system is the problem. The reason people who get into office very often don't behave the way in which they promised they would behave is that we live in a highly unequal society in which ambitious people who want to get in on the economic action find it difficult to do so because there are all sorts of barriers. And many of them turn to politics as a way to getting ahead in the world where they would previously would have otherwise go into business, etc. And that's a huge problem for the country, and it leads to inequalities, etc. But it's not the system that's the problem. The system, I don't think the system is terribly much a problem. It's a question of getting the system to work in the way in which it's supposed to. It's meant to work, and for that you need activism, and for that you need pressure, etc. So it's not that the system's failed, that the system hasn't been tried properly yet. It hasn't worked in the way it's supposed to. And it's for that reason that I'm very skeptical, A, of the idea that we need to change the electoral system. I'm not upset about changing the electoral system. I don't think it would be a disaster. I just don't think it would change anything. Because the problem is not the electoral system. The problem is that there's not enough and people are not able to hold the people who they elect to account more effectively. So in a nutshell, I mean, I would advise worrying far less about the electoral system and worrying far more about how we change the balance of power, which at the moment means that the people who get elected very often worry about themselves and about the big donors, as Ricky pointed out, and don't worry about the people they need to serve. And hopefully the suggestions we made will help you come up with new activist strategies which begin to change that balance of power and start to give the majority of South Africans a voice in the democratic system. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. and Comrade Janice. Is it okay for us to just bring this session to a close in that way? No? I think we've surfaced and landed some of the big questions we had going in, and we've got things to percolate on, to marinate, no? For our ongoing sessions. I'm just going to call Minhaj to come. We had briefed him already to do a thank you to the both of you. And then from there, I've got one short announcement, and we'll talk about what's next. But Nkosi kakhulu, I definitely enjoyed spending this time with both of you. Nkosi nakoni comrades, ne, for staying in the room. Soft things.
Prof. Stephen and Janet, thank you so much. This was incredibly valuable for our process. After lunch, we're going to take what we've discussed here into a strategic discussion. So it did build on the foundation that we built yesterday. We'll keep in touch with both of you on the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
So the truth of the matter is that people did leave the room, no? But that's okay. But we must talk to each other about what we need to stay in the room. Is that fair? We start at some point, but we must always come back. So if people need different things, like if we must open these curtains, and these windows, if we need the sessions to be shorter sometimes, maybe we take a hard pause, then let's do that. Just so that we only get the full experience of being here. Is that okay? And your engagement and shouties, I'm just sharing.
Yeah.
I did not get this book. I'm a teacher by trade, so it comes across sometimes. So we've got 15 minutes left. But quick announcement related to 15 minutes. I think we're done there.
Yeah, in this room. Another panel, but not another.